The murmurs in the courtroom died down as the bailiff called the room to order. Fluorescent lights cast a pale glow over the mahogany benches, and all eyes turned toward the woman standing confidently before the jury box. Sarah Blake, a determined attorney in her early 30s, adjusted the cuffs of her charcoal gray blazer before stepping forward. Her gaze swept across the 12 strangers who would determine the fate of her client. She could feel the tension in the air, the kind that only settles in places where truth, reputation, and freedom are up for debate. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady but rich with quiet fire. "What you're about to hear is not just a case, it's a story. And like all stories, it has a victim, a villain, and a fight for the truth." Her client, Michael Greer, sat silently at the defense table, his face pale but composed. Wrongfully accused of arson and attempted murder, he had spent the last 6 months as a pariah in his own community. The fire had gutted a local community center one he'd helped build. The evidence against him had been circumstantial, but enough for an indictment. Sarah continued, "Michael Greer is not a criminal. He is not reckless, or vengeful, or violent. What he is a scapegoat." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge, a seasoned man known for his impatience, leaned forward slightly. Sarah's mind briefly drifted back to how this all started. 2 years ago, Sarah had been working long hours at a corporate firm in Chicago. A rising star, she had been on track for partnership until the day she received a call from her hometown of Havenport. Her younger brother had been arrested in a protest gone wrong. He'd been released within days, but the feeling lingered. Something about seeing her brother in a jail cell, shackled, accused, and misunderstood, had broken her dot. She quit the firm a month later and moved back to Havenport. She set up a modest practice focused on criminal defense, determined to give a voice to people like her brother, like Michael, people caught in the machinery of the justice system, gears grinding regardless of guilt. Sarah's voice brought the room back to the present. You will hear from witnesses, you will see photos, and you will be asked to believe that Michael Greer, a man with no criminal record, who has dedicated his life to community work, suddenly decided to burn down a building he helped create. She paused. "I ask you, does that make sense?" At the prosecution table, David Langston, the lead prosecutor, showed no reaction. His features were carved from stone, a man who had seen too many cases and grown numb to nuance. But Sarah knew better. David was brilliant, calculated, and unflinching in court. She had gone up against him once before, and she'd lost. But this time felt different. This time she had to win. Her eyes flicked to the back row of the courtroom. Tim, a nervous young man in his early 20s, sat with hunched shoulders and darting eyes. He had been at the community center the night of the fire, though he had never come forward. Sarah suspected he knew more than he was willing to say. She had seen him at every preliminary hearing, watching, waiting. Why? As the trial unfolded, Sarah pieced the puzzle together for the jury. Surveillance footage that seemed to incriminate. Michael was shown to have a 15-minute gap just enough time for someone else to enter and leave the scene. Witnesses testified to Michael's kindness, his tireless hours renovating the center. But David pressed on. He presented receipts for gas cans bought in Michael's name. He highlighted old emails where Michael expressed frustration over the center's funding issues. He questioned whether the hero persona was merely a mask. Each day in court was a battle of narratives, and each night Sarah sat alone in her office, reviewing documents, listening to voicemails, and questioning herself. Was she missing something? Then came the breakthrough. One evening, as Sarah sat staring at security footage yet again, she noticed a figure in the background, barely visible in a reflection on a glass door. A hoodie, a limp in the walk, a flash of something metallic. She paused, rewound, played it again. Her phone rang. Miss Blake. The voice on the line was low. "This is Tim. I think I need to tell you something." The next day, Tim took the stand. His hands trembled, his voice cracking as he recounted the night of the fire. He had stayed late to clean up. He had seen Michael leave before 10 p.m. The fire didn't start until nearly an hour later, but he had been too afraid to come forward. He was undocumented and terrified that going public would cost him his life here. Tears welled in his eyes as he held Bupper keychain, the same metallic flash from the video, bend a small, jagged, flame-shaped pendant. It matched the reflection. "Do you recognize this?" Sarah asked. Tim nodded. It belonged to Troy Bennett. The name sent ripples through the courtroom. Troy had been fired from the community center months before the fire, resentful, known for outbursts. A week later, with Tim's statement and new evidence, Sarah had the grounds to file a motion. The judge granted it. Charges against Michael were dropped. In the final scene, outside the courthouse, Sarah stood in the cold spring air. Michael hugged her tightly, tears in his eyes. "You saved my life," he whispered. She shook her head. "You never should have needed saving." From across the courtyard, David watched silently. He gave her a slow nod, professional respect, maybe even remorse. Sarah didn't return the gesture. Not yet. As the crowd cleared, Tim approached. "Thank you," he said, "for listening." "You were brave," she replied. "I just helped you speak." Tim smiled, then walked away into the sunlit street. Sarah stood alone for a moment, breathing in the victory. Justice wasn't perfect, but today it had come a little closer. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Silence blanketed the courtroom once more as Sarah Blake rose from her seat, her face unreadable, her movements slow but deliberate. The second day of the trial had begun, and it was time for her to call her first witness. "All rise," the bailiff called as the judge re-entered. The murmurs ceased. The jury members returned to their seats with guarded expressions. Everyone in the room sensed the importance of this moment. And then Sarah spoke the name, Jordan Wells. A ripple of whispers spread across the gallery. Jordan, a tall man in his mid-30s with close-cropped hair and tired eyes. entered the witness box slowly, avoiding Michael Greer's gaze. His jaw was tight, his walk hesitant. He had once been Michael's closest friend, and now the courtroom wondered whose side he was really on. Sarah stepped forward. "Mr. Wells, thank you for being here today." Jordan gave a small nod, barely making eye contact. "You were a volunteer coordinator at the Havenport Community Center, correct?" "Yes, until about 6 months ago." "Why did you leave?" Jordan hesitated. "I was asked to step down. There were disagreements, budget issues, leadership friction." Sarah paused, letting his words hang in the air. "You mean you had a falling out with the defendant, Michael Greer?" Jordan finally looked at Michael. "Yes." Sarah turned to the jury. "So, you're not here today out of loyalty. You're here to tell the truth. Is that correct?" "Yes," he said firmly. She nodded. "Walk us through the week leading up to the fire. Did you notice anything unusual?" Jordan leaned forward slightly. There was tension. Someone was coming round after hours, messing with equipment, leaving back doors unlocked. Michael and I argued about it. He didn't think it was serious. "Did you report it?" "I mentioned it to security, but I didn't push. I was already on thin ice." Sarah's tone shifted. "You said someone was coming around. Did you see this person?" Jordan nodded slowly. "Yes, I believe it was Troy Bennett." Another murmur rolled through the room. Sarah could feel the ripple of tension tighten. Troy had been fired months before the fire for repeated misconduct. His name had not been mentioned until now. "Can you be certain?" "I saw him outside the side door 2 nights before the fire. Hoodie, same walk, same silver lighter he always flicked when he was nervous." Sarah looked toward the judge. "Let the record show the witness has identified a potential alternate suspect." David Langston, the prosecutor, stood. "Objection speculative." The judge overruled with a sharp, "Let's see where this is going." Sarah continued. "Did Michael ever express hostility toward the center? Did he ever mention harming it?" Jordan shook his head. "No. He was stubborn, sure. But he loved that place. He built it. I was angry at him. But even I knew he'd never destroy it." Sarah gave a tight, subtle nod. No further questions. She returned to her seat. Her expression combat. The storm was coming. David Langston rose with the smooth precision of a man who'd dismantled hundreds of testimonies. His dark tie sat perfectly against his crisp white shirt. His every movement was composed, cold, lethal. "Mr. Wells," he began with mock politeness, "how many times have you changed your story in the last 6 months?" Jordan's face flushed. "I haven't. You haven't. Because I have your first police statement, here where you said, and I quote, 'Michael was acting strange.'" "I thought he might have snapped." Jordan swallowed hard. David stepped closer. "That doesn't sound like someone you trust." "I was angry. I felt betrayed. I didn't know what to believe at the time. But now you do." David leaned forward. "Or are you just trying to clear your conscience after stabbing your friend in the back?" "Objection," Sarah snapped, argumentative. "Sustained," the judge said with a warning glare. David shifted gears. but not before locking eyes with the jury, planting the seed of doubt. He stepped back, cool as ever. "Just one more question, Mr. Wells. When you saw this Troy Bennett outside, did you report it?" Jordan's lips parted, but no words came. "Exactly," David said, turning away. "No further questions." Jordan sat stiffly, guilt written all over his face as he stepped down. Sarah could see the damage David had done, and she knew Tear had to regain the jury's trust stand fast as the court took a brief recess. Eyes turned toward a woman in a red dress sitting quietly in the gallery. Her name was Maya, and she had been at nearly every hearing since the beginning. Her eyes were locked on Michael, but it wasn't judgment she carried, it was concern. Pain don't know one knew her connection to the case. Not yet. When the session resumed, Sarah returned to the floor. She stood tall, the weight of truth in her voice. "Your Honor, I would like to re-question the witness briefly," Jordan returned, looking more composed. "Earlier, you were asked why you didn't report seeing Troy. Can you explain why?" Jordan looked down, shame flickering across his face. "Because I didn't think anyone would believe me. I'd already been forced out. People thought I was bitter. Were you bitter?" "Yes," he admitted, "but I still wanted the truth to come out." Sarah took a deep breath. "And did Michael ever threaten you, retaliate, or act violently when you left?" "No. In fact, he offered me help when I didn't have work." Sarah looked back at the jury. "Does that sound like a man who would burn down his life's work?" A few jurors shifted in their seats. One scribbled in a notepad. "No further questions," Sarah said, letting Jordan leave the stand for good. As the day ended, Sarah packed her files slowly. Michael leaned toward her, whispering, "Do you think they believed him?" "I think they wanted to," she replied. "We just have to show them why they should." From the gallery, Maya watched them go. When Sarah caught her eye, Maya gave her a small, knowing nod like someone who held a piece of the puzzle no one else had noticed. The trial was far from over, but today, for the first time, doubt had entered the prosecution's fortress, and Sarah would find a way to tear it down. The third day of the trial began like any other tightly buttoned suits. Hushed conversations and the rhythmic clicking of heels across marble floors. But beneath the calm exterior, Sarah Blake felt the tremble of something shifting. She had barely touched her coffee during the morning recess when her paralegal slipped her a folded note. It was hastily scribbled and unsigned. "Tim knows more than he says. Ask about the lighter." Sarah's eyes darted toward the back of the courtroom, where Tim, the soft-spoken young man who had attended every hearing, sat as always, lone, quiet, haunted. His gaze met hers for the briefest moment before he looked away. She knew then this trial wasn't going to be won in legal briefs. It would be won in courage. Sarah found Tim outside the courthouse, sitting on the steps, head down, nervously, flicking the corner of a dog-eared book. His backpack rested beside him, and the wind caught the edge of a worn notebook peeking out. "Tim," she said gently. He looked up, startled. "Miss Blake, I didn't mean to be a distraction." You're not. But I need to ask you something. She knelt beside him, lowering her voice. Did you see anything the night of the fire? Tim froze. His throat bobbed. Why does it matter what I saw? No one would believe me. I will, she said, but only if you tell me the truth. He hesitated, then slowly pulled something from his pocket, a silver lighter engraved with a flame symbol. He dropped this when he ran, Tim whispered. Troy. I saw him coming out the back door, hoodie, limp in his step. Sarah's breath caught. Why didn't you come forward? Tim looked away, eyes wet. Because I'm nobody. I'm undocumented. My parents brought me here when I was 6. If I speak, I risk everything. And no one ever protects people like me. Sarah's voice softened. You're not nobody, Tim. You saw the truth. And right now, that truth could save an innocent man. He clutched the lighter tighter. Michael didn't start that fire, he whispered. No, Sarah replied, but you can help me prove it. Later that afternoon, the courtroom buzzed as Sarah informed the judge of a new witness. David Langston raised an eyebrow but said nothing, watching her with quiet suspicion. In a quiet prep room behind the courtroom, Sarah sat with Tim, helping him rehearse. I'm scared, he admitted. What if I mess up? What if they tear me apart? They'll try, Sarah said honestly. But you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be truthful. You're not on trial. You're a witness to justice. Tim nodded slowly, drawing strength from her words. It wasn't just about Michael anymore. It was about him to finally standing up for what was right. Even if his voice shook as Tim stepped into the witness box later that day. The entire room leaned in. He looked young, too young to be carrying such weight. But as he spoke, his voice unsteady but clear, something shifted. He told them about staying late to clean, about hearing noises, about seeing the figure slip out the back, about the lighter and the unmistakable limp, about how Michael had already left long before the fire started, and when David tried to challenge his credibility, Sarah stood and objected not just with legal grounds, but with conviction. Your honor, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like glass. This young man has risked everything to tell the truth, and that truth deserves to be heard. The judge allowed it. The jury listened, and for the first time, so did everyone else. That night, as the courthouse emptied, Sarah walked with Tim to the gates. You did something brave today, she said. I was tired of being scared, he replied. They shared a quiet moment of understanding, to very different people, bound together by justice, and deep inside, Sarah knew the tide was turning. The gallery was full more than usual. Word had spread that Tim Moreno, the quiet young man who had observed the trial from the back row each day, was finally stepping into the spotlight. No one could have predicted the ripple effect his voice would have. Even Judge Harlan, a stoic presence throughout the proceedings, leaned forward slightly as Tim was sworn in. He looked small in the witness box, dwarfed by the gravity of the courtroom. But Sarah saw something else, resolve behind his nervous eyes. This was a boy who had lived in the shadows and, today, he chose the light. Please state your name, For the record, Sarah said gently. Timothy Moreno. And why are you here today, Tim? He took a shaky breath, his voice cracking slightly. Because I saw what happened the night the community center burned. And for a long time, I didn't say anything. I was scared. A hush fell over the room. Even David Langston, the ruthless prosecutor, paused his scribbling. Sarah stepped aside, giving Tim space to speak. Just tell us what you remember. Tim's hands gripped the railing tightly as he spoke. I was helping clean up after hours. Paul. I didn't want to go home yet. I stayed late sometimes. No one really noticed me. Around midnight, I heard a noise by the side entrance. At first I thought it was Michael. He'd forgotten his laptop earlier. When I peeked through the hallway window, I saw someone else. He reached into his pocket, holding up the silver lighter. He dropped it when he ran. Troy Bennett. I knew it was him. He used to hang around with this exact lighter flicked. It when he was anxious. He hesitated, then added, he had a limp. Same as that night. Sarah nodded, stepping closer. And why didn't you report what you saw right away? Tim's voice dropped. Because I'm undocumented. I've lived here since I was 6. I didn't want trouble. I thought, if I stayed quiet, it would pass. But then they arrested Michael, and I couldn't sleep anymore. His words cracked something open in the room. Sarah leaned in. Do you believe Michael set that fire? No, Tim said clearly. I know he didn't, because I saw who did. David stood, the familiar gleam, buff strategy in his eyes. Mr. Moreno, he said smoothly, you're asking this court to take your word, despite having remained silent for months, and having no documentation to even verify your identity. Objection, Sarah fired back. The judge sustained. David adjusted his approach. You claim you saw someone, but you didn't go to the police. You didn't tell anyone until just now. Isn't it possible your memory is flawed? Tim didn't flinch. I remember what I saw. I remember the limp. I remember the lighter. And I remember Michael was already gone. David's smile faded. I may not be important to you, Tim said, voice rising slightly. But I know what I saw, and I've carried that guilt with me every day. A juror wiped her eye. Sarah saw others nodding subtly. The truth had landed. Just as the court settled into the weight of Tim's words, the door at the back of the courtroom opened. Your Honor, Sarah said quickly, her voice tight with urgency. A new witness has come forward. Someone we didn't expect. Murmurs broke out. Judge Harlan glanced at his clerk. Very well, bring them in. All eyes turned as Maya Vance, the woman in the red dress who had sat silently through every session, stepped forward. David's jaw clenched. Please state your name, the judge requested. Maya Vance. I'm Troy Bennett's sister. Gasps filled the courtroom. Sarah approached carefully. Miss Vance, why come forward now? She swallowed. Because I know what my brother did. He confessed to me 2 weeks after the fire. He was drunk, said he wanted revenge after being fired, said no one would believe a burnout like him, David. Bet shot to his feet. Objection. Hearsay. The judge overruled. Let's hear her out. Maya's voice steadied. He hid the lighter in my apartment. I found it a month ago and realized he wasn't just talking nonsense. I told myself it wasn't my place. But watching this boy, she gestured toward Tim, take the stand. I realized silence is just another kind of lie. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small black USB stick. This contains a voice recording. My brother. He left it on my voicemail the night before he left town. Sarah played the recording aloud. Troy's voice echoed through the room. I screwed up, Maya. I was angry. I didn't mean for it to get that bad. Just wanted to scare them. Michael wasn't supposed to be blamed. But I'm not going to jail for this. Silence. The courtroom shifted, like the floor had tilted. The judge called for a brief recess, but the damage was done. Outside, Sarah stood beside Tim as reporters began gathering. He looked overwhelmed, but she put a steadying hand on his shoulder. You were brave, she said, and your voice turned the tide. He gave a small smile. Feels good to finally be heard. And behind them, the courthouse buzzed not with accusation, but with awakening. Because in that room where justice had once seemed blind, truth had found its way to the front row. The courtroom was silent, save for the slow ticking of the clock on the back wall. Hours had passed since the jury retired to deliberate, but time felt suspended. No one moved much. Conversations were hushed. Eyes darted toward the jury door. By every few minutes, and the air felt heavy with the weight of everything said and everything left unsaid. Sarah Blake sat quietly at the defense table, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had delivered the closing argument hours earlier, precise, passionate, and unflinching. Her voice had echoed through the courtroom, reminding the jury not only of Michael's innocence, but of the courage it took for Tim and Maya to come forward. She had asked them not just for a verdict, but for justice. Now, all she could do was wait on the other side of the aisle. David Langston leaned back in his chair, lips tight. The once confident prosecutor had lost his composure in the final hours of the trial, and while he remained outwardly calm, Sarah could see it the smallest tremble in his pen. The downward glance when jurors left the room. He knew the tide had turned. Behind Sarah, the gallery was packed. Tim sat between her paralegal and his older sister, clutching a tissue in one hand and his immigration documents in the other. Maya Vance, dignified and quietly grieving the betrayal of her brother, sat 2 rows behind, eyes closed in silent prayer. Sarah stared forward, replaying everything in her mind. The long nights, the fear of losing, the pressure of taking on a system that so easily dismisses the marginalized. But she also remembered every hand that had held hers through it, the mentors who believed in her, the witnesses who took risks, and the client who had never stopped saying, "I didn't do it." The door creaked open. The bailiff stepped inside. Jury has reached a verdict. Gasps, shuffling, and then stillness. The judge returned to the bench. Michael, the accused, sat upright beside Sarah, his hands visibly shaking. The jurors filed in, 12 faces, unreadable. The foreperson stood. In the case of the state versus Michael Dawson, on the charge of arson, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted in a wave of emotion. Michael let out a breath he'd held for months, covering his face in his hands, sobbing. Sarah reached over, gripping his shoulder. She, too, felt tears welling, not from relief alone, but from exhaustion, from vindication, from knowing that the truth had finally been heard. David said nothing. He simply gathered his files and left the courtroom without looking back. Outside, the courthouse steps were a swirl of reporters, microphones, and flashes. But Sarah stood to the side, her coat pulled tight around her. Tim approached her, uncertain. "You did it," he said. She shook her head. "We did it." He smiled, then handed her something. The lighter, a reminder that silence can burn, but truth can rebuild. She held it for a moment, then tucked it into her pocket. In the days that followed, the fallout rippled outward. An internal investigation was launched into the DA's office. Maya's recording was handed over to federal authorities. Troy Bennett was placed on a wanted list. Michael was a free man again, but changed. The injustice had left scars. But he began speaking at youth centers, telling his story so others wouldn't be afraid to speak up. Tim filed for legal protection under a whistleblower visa. His courage had opened more doors than he expected. And Sarah, she returned to her office, surrounded by letters of support and new requests for representation. But more than the cases ahead, she held on to the one they had just won, not just because of the verdict, but because it proved that justice, while flawed, was still worth fighting for. The story closed not with a cheer, but a quiet resolve. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's whispered through bravery, carried by truth, and written in the hearts of those who refuse to give up. And in that courtroom, one truth became clear. Justice is not just the absence of guilt, but the presence of courage.